Good morning. I'm Savannah Sellers. Joe has the morning off. Right now on Morning News Now, historic hike. The Federal Reserve takes a drastic step to fight inflation, raising the interest rate by 0.75%. From the price of gas to groceries, credit cards, and utility bills, we'll take a look at what this means for you. New evidence. The January 6th committee will meet for another public hearing today. They're expected to unveil new information about former President Trump's plot to pressure Vice President Pence to throw out the electoral votes and stay in power. Plus, the new video showing a GOP lawmaker giving a tour of the Capitol complex on the eve of the attack. One of the guests was later heard threatening Democrats outside on January 6th. What his lawmaker now says about it all. Weather extremes, from tornadoes and floods to dangerous heat. Millions of Americans are waking up under weather alerts. The damage people are seeing across the country. We'll take a look at what's next and when these record temps will cool down. Plus, reinventing Anna, a Morning News Now exclusive. I speak with fake heiress Anna Sorkin, also known as Anna Delvey, as she sits in an ICE detention facility. You may know her from the hit Netflix show Inventing Anna. Now she's talking about her crimes. Do you think you crossed that line?
Well, the government definitely thinks that way, so.
What she told me about whether she feels any remorse, the new project she's working on now, and her plans for the future. It was a fascinating conversation to have, and I'm thrilled to be bringing that to you later this morning. We begin with that historic announcement from the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates by 0.75%. Now, that's the largest interest rate hike since 1994, as the Fed races to tame the highest level of inflation in nearly 40 years. After the decision, Fed Chair Jerome Powell said the central bank will do what it takes to bring prices down and ease the burden on Americans who are struggling to make ends meet.
The current picture is plain to see. The labor market is extremely tight, and inflation is much too high. We're not going to declare victory until we see a series of these, really see convincing evidence, compelling evidence that inflation is coming down.
Farnoosh Torabi, CNET Money Editor at Large, joins us now. Farnoosh, good morning. We're great to have you with us because, look, people are waking up this morning stressed, wondering what it means from them. We're happy to have you walk us through it. So what do you make of this move from the Federal Reserve? Do you think it will be able to tame inflation and avoid sending the economy into a recession? Walk us through kind of all these little maneuvers and what they mean together.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and good morning to everybody. I think it was an appropriate move. I mean, look, it's a historic by some measures. We haven't seen a rate hike of this size since the 90s. And I think it's appropriate because when you look at where inflation is and the fact that average households are spending an extra $350 a month on expenses that they had last year, the same expenses they have this year, nothing else has changed except prices have just gone up. Their wages have not caught up to that. And so I think it was necessary. Now, what this is going to mean for us is that ultimately, the Fed understands that help is urgent. They need to really step in and not be sort of passive or increase rates incrementally a little bit. They really need to be aggressive because we need to slow down prices. We need to cool the economy. The Fed benchmark inflation rate is about 2%. We're at like 4 times that right now. It's going to be a little bit difficult or a lot difficult depending on your situation going forward, because when you raise interest rates, what does that mean? It means that there's going to be some temporary pain. Borrowing money, whether that's because you carry a credit card, a student loan that has a variable interest rate, or you're looking for a mortgage, rates are going up and they may adjust higher, again, if your rate is an adjustable variable loan rate. And so the cost to borrow will go up. And we may see layoffs as well, because when borrowing costs go up, that doesn't just mean our costs as consumers, but also as business owners. So borrowing capital to hire, to buy machinery, to expand, that's all going to become more expensive for employers. And then so the counter effect to that is usually layoffs.
So you're talking about some of this, but I mean, we've heard about how much of a difference these rate hikes have overall on the economy. Layoffs is a really good example, but walk us through how these moves from the Federal Reserve will impact people at home, people who are struggling to keep up with this rampant inflation. I mean, I think the assumption from the regular person at home is, well, I think they're doing this to help me. I think this is supposed to make things better. Will it?
Yeah. in the long run, this is a journey. Let's all remember that it's not going to fix the economy overnight. The idea is that by raising interest rates, it's going to slow down spending. There is a lot of demand for goods and services right now. And as we know, supply is just not catching up to that. And that's not our fault. The supply disruptions have been happening since COVID. And that is not something we can Fed hike our way out of. So we have to also address that. But for consumers, what this will mean is that, our rates are going to go up on credit cards and other sorts of debt. And so if you're in the market for a home, if you're in the market for a credit card, if you're in the market for other kinds of borrowing costs, you really want to pay attention to that interest rate. The silver lining is that savings rates could also go up as rates go up. So again, this is intentional. The economy, in order for the economy to cool, we need to slow down spending and save. And so there may be more a higher interest rate waiting for you at your bank, or definitely good time to shop around for higher yields.
Farnoosh Torabi, thank you so much. Lots of good advice for people at home there and the reality of the situation, but some things that can ease some fears. Thanks for your time this morning. Let's now get reaction from the White House to all this from NBC News reporter Maura Barrett. She joins us now from Washington, D.C. Maura, always great to have you on. So we saw, of course, that this effort is to fight inflation. And we know President Biden said a couple weeks ago he would just let the Fed do its job without interference. Do we think that will still be the case if this rate hike does not get inflation under control?
Good morning, Savannah. Well, we knew this interest rate was coming, the hike was coming, right? And the White House has known that. We didn't know it was going to be so high. But over the last several weeks, the president and the White House have been hedging what they can do. Remember, the Fed is independent from the White House. The White House Economic Council of Advisors, though, saying that they believe in the Fed and that the president trusts in the Fed and that it's the first line of defense in order to tackle inflation. Now, separately, though, the White House is saying that it's doing what it can, noting that there's still work to be done. Overnight, we learned that today the president will sign into law the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. This was passed on a bipartisan measure by Congress earlier this week. And this is something that will address those high shipping prices. All of us have been impacted by those holdups on the supply chain. And during the pandemic, ocean shipping prices were spiked up to over almost 1,000%, according to the White House. And so this law will increase oversight over items like that, which impact retailers and farmers that are trying to ship their goods out, as well as consumers like us that are trying to buy goods. And so separate from those interest rate hikes, this is one of the things that the White House is trying to tackle when it comes to inflation.
Let's also talk about gas prices. We know the White House is also putting pressure on oil companies to increase their refining capacity. This is one of those very direct pains that people are feeling right now, how much it costs for gas really across the whole country. Tell us about this new stance.
Right, and the White House has been quick to remind that the gas price impact that we're seeing is a result mostly to the war in Ukraine, calling it Putin's price hike, right, because of the spike that we're seeing. And so yesterday, the president sent a letter to various CEOs of gas companies urging them to increase production when it comes to oil, gas, and diesel, because if there's more on the market, that means prices will go down. He said that he is prepared to use necessary tools and emergency authorizations to make sure that refinery production is increased. And I want you to hear from White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre yesterday about where the White House sees the responsibility on these corporations.
We see it as a patriotic duty, as we've talked about. There's war happening right now in Ukraine that was caused by Russia, which is why we're seeing these hikes in gas prices, especially since Russia has started amassing troops on the border. We've seen a $2 increase of gas prices. So we know where to put the blame on the war, but oil companies, they have oil refineries, they have responsibility too. What they have been doing is taking advantage of the war.
So you heard that claim of patriotic duty. It appears the White House playing a blame game on who can take responsibility for what, right? There's only so much the president can do himself. He said earlier this week in Philadelphia that there is still a lot of work to be done. There's stuff the White House can do, but he also noted that there's work these oil companies can do, as well as Congress, to bring down costs on prescription drug prices and childcare costs, Savannah.
Lots of places people are really hoping to feel some relief. Maura Barrett, thank you so much. Now, the January 6th House committee investigating the attack on the U.S. Capitol will hold its third public hearing this afternoon, and we're expected to hear more about former President Trump's efforts to pressure his then Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the 2020 election results. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Rafa joins us now with a preview. Hey, Ali, good morning. So each of these has had their own sort of focus, their own thesis statement for what all this evidence is trying to support that day. Today, that's the focus, Mike Pence and Trump's efforts to get him to intervene. So what is the committee planning to zero in on? How are they trying to prove that?
Yeah, Savannah, well, you laid out the main topic there, but the committee told reporters yesterday that this hearing is going to be divided really into four themes, the first of which is really the birth of this conspiracy that former Vice President Mike Pence would be able to overturn the election unilaterally. The second is Trump's actual pressure campaign on the vice president, how that pressure campaign was pushed and really publicized on Twitter and as well as in private phone calls and meetings that the president had with the former vice president, and then how that led to the violence at the Capitol that day, and how the violence at the Capitol that day really continues to threaten our democracy. The committee is saying that we are going to again hear never before seen testimony, video, photos. We're going to hear from two witnesses, one of them Greg Jacobs, former advisor to Mike Pence, as well as an informal advisor, a legal advisor that he had. And they're expected to really talk about one of them being with him that day, what that was like. We've seen that video of him being shuffled off of the Senate floor, taken to a safe space with his Secret Service detail, really what it was like being in that room with him during that waiting period as they waited to be able to leave safely. Another person we're expected to hear from in pre-recorded testimony is Mark Short, his former chief of staff. The committee providing exclusive video only to NBC News ahead of this hearing, showing a little preview of Mark Short's pre-recorded testimony. Listen here.
Was it your impression that the vice president had directly conveyed his position on these issues to the president, not just to the world through a dear colleague letter, but directly to President Trump?
Many times.
And had been consistent in conveying his position to the president?
Very consistent.
So the committee is committed to showing just how much the former vice president knew about the former president's pressure campaign and how he continued to deny that he was able to do so even up until that morning. And committee member Pete Aguilar telling my colleague Garrett Haake in a video that will air later this morning, really that the vice president was in more danger than any of us knew that morning, Savannah.
Ali, quickly, I do want to get to something that we teased a minute ago, which is this new footage released just yesterday of a man who they say made verbal threats against top lawmakers. We know he was given a tour of the Capitol. Here's that video just a day before by a Georgia congressman. Quickly, tell us about what that congressman is saying. How is he responding to it?
Yeah, this is a second letter by the committee asking for more information from Loudermilk about that tour he gave the day before the insurrection at the Capitol. Of course, tours being prohibited because of COVID during that time. And Loudermilk has first stated months ago that he didn't even give that tour. Now he's saying that he doesn't think it was suspicious. He doesn't think there was any wrongdoing here, even though he took this group of people, these constituents from Georgia, really to these insignificant places in the Capitol that I walk by every day. There's really no historical or tourist significance. Listen to a piece of his reaction here.
They've never sent me a letter asking me, never called me. They send it to you guys. So if they were interested in the truth, they had a year and 4 months to call me and talk. I would have been glad to talk to them about it because there's nothing there. And
so why not just speak to the committee and just...
Because the committee's never called me and asked me anything.
They sent a letter asking for your voluntary cooperation.
They never sent it to me.
Your office never received it?
No, never.
The committee is saying that one member of that group was seen on January 6th outside the Capitol making threats to several Democratic lawmakers. Savannah.
All right, Ali Rafa, lots to watch for this afternoon. Thank you so much. And let's stay on this and bring in Barbara McQuade. She's a former U.S. attorney and a law professor at the University of Michigan Law School. Barbara, good morning. Thanks for being with us. So let's start here with this focus. And I want to know what you think it's going to take here for this committee to sort of prove that Vice President Pence was being pressured to block the certification of the election President Trump's involvement in it. What does the committee need to do to successfully make that case to the public?
Well, Savannah, I think this is the topic that is the most closely aligned to a potential criminal charge. Everybody sees the mob scene as, clearly the most dangerous part of what happened on January 6th. But it can be difficult to tie President Trump to that mob. Where we can tie him precisely directly to this attack is his efforts to pressure Mike Pence to overturn the election. Now, we don't have Pence himself to testify. That would be the best way to prove it. But we do know that we're going to hear from two people who are the next best thing. Greg Jacob, who was his chief counsel, and it sounds like video testimony from Mark Short, who was his chief of staff. And I believe what they're going to testify to, because it has been reported about their deposition testimony, that they're going to talk about how President Trump pressured Mike Pence right up until and on January 6th to overturn the election. We know he did it publicly. He did it at the Ellipse rally. He did it in tweets. But what those close to Mike Pence will say is that he continued to pressure him on January 6th and even said, wouldn't it be great to have that power to be able to control the outcome of the election? And Mike Pence said, no, that's horrifying. We're a democracy. We don't do it that way. So I think this is a very effective way to show that Donald Trump tried to defraud the United States and obstruct an official proceeding.
You mentioned a tweet. You mentioned tweets, and there's one specifically that's going to come into play today. So one of the things that we're expecting to see is the panel make this case that Pence's life was actually in more physical danger than previously known than we'd realized. And California Congressman Pete Aguilar told NBC News that Trump knew the Capitol had been breached when he sent out this disparaging tweet about his former vice president. What do you make of that, and does it help prove anything?
It's really horrifying. I think that, before this reporting, there was the possibility that the news had not yet reached Donald Trump that the Capitol had been breached. And so he was still persisting in this effort to pressure Mike Pence. Knowing that he was aware that the Capitol had been breached and that Mike Pence was in physical danger, continuing to foment this kind of rage is incredibly irresponsible. It's reckless. Now, does it tie Trump to the mob violence? I don't know that it gets there. I think this is part of the story that the committee needs to tell. I don't know that it ultimately is part of the story of proving a crime against Donald Trump.
Barbara, something we are all going to be watching for this afternoon. I do want to switch gears before I let you go to just ask you a question about a different topic here. The shooting last month at a Buffalo supermarket. So federal prosecutors have filed hate crime charges against the gunman at this point. What do you make of that? Was that expected, given what the criminal complaint says the motive was and what we know about what happened that day?
I think so. This is really about the best and strongest crime that exists. As you know, there's no federal domestic terrorism statute which would fit these crimes. But hate crime, meaning an act of violence on account of a person's race, absolutely fits these charges. I think the thing to watch for that's really interesting here is this is a death-eligible offense. And in an administration with Joe Biden, who has expressed his opposition to the death penalty, this is one of those cases that will really test that viewpoint. It's, one of those worst-case scenarios when people can always say, yeah, but what about death in this horrible scenario? And this is one of them. So it'll be interesting to see. And this decision won't come until down the road after the Justice Department has had a chance to look at all the potential mitigating factors, whether they will seek the death penalty.
Barbara McQuade, thank you so much for your analysis and your time this morning. We appreciate it. And you can watch today's hearing right here on NBC News Now. Our live coverage starts at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Now let's head to Montana, where the governor has declared a statewide disaster after that devastating flooding that hit the state. This morning, Yellowstone National Park remains closed indefinitely. Rising waters destroyed roads leading into the tourist destination, and we're learning it could be months before those entrances reopen. NBC News correspondent Miguel Almaguer has the latest there.
Whoa. This was the harrowing escape out of Yellowstone as boulders tumble down mountains and a home washed into a river, floating nearly 5 miles downstream.
We had no warning. They're just like, get in, get in, get in.
For Nicole O'Shea and nearly 100 other people cut off by dangerous, fast-rising floodwaters, these helicopter rides were their only chance for rescue.
It landed, and it was, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. It was so emotional because none of us were expecting it.
Across large swaths of Montana, historic flooding washed away roads and submerged them under feet of water.
The water started rolling in the back, broke out a basement window, started filling up my basement, and then I quit.
Holy! Even bridges with their mangled trestles floated downstream, ripped apart by raging currents.
It was frightening because in addition to all of this debris coming, you can hear the rocks in the creek. These are giant boulders.
A state of emergency as roads into Yellowstone National Park remain closed indefinitely at the start of the peak summer season.
It's safe to say that it's going to be an extended period of time. The northern end will be closed.
With 10,000 people evacuated from the nation's oldest national park, this is the first time flooding has ever closed it.
And in the afternoon, it started rising even more, and we had to move everything to high ground.
The deluge fueled by an atmospheric river or stream of moisture, pounding the region with inches of rain.
And it wasn't just rain, but snowmelt that filled these rivers. One of them rising 6 feet in just 24 hours. So much water, it toppled into nearby communities below. The water just now beginning to recede.
Historic flooding and unprecedented damage at one of our nation's most stunning national parks. Mother Nature's beauty now suffering from its wrath.
Today, the park remains closed indefinitely. We're told it could be a couple of weeks, if not months, until the roads open. That would be disastrous for the summer travel season and the families that want to come here. Meantime, in Billings, Montana, floodwaters are also threatening a water treatment plant. That city could run out of water in the next couple of days if the water levels don't recede. Back to you.
All right, Miguel Almaguer, thank you for that report from the ground. Let's now get a check on your morning news now weather, which means Michelle Grossman joins me now. Hey, Michelle, I mean, some of those images, the videos, it's just heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking. It's so sad. And we're going to add to those images, unfortunately. Good morning, Savannah, because we have those dangerous conditions continuing. We have dangerous heat, historical heat, record-breaking heat, not only this week, but it looks like it will be extended into next week as well. And this is just the beginning of the season. So let's take a look at how many people are under an alert. That's 61 million Americans. We have alerts stretching from the Central Plains to the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, down to the Southeast, the Southwest, too. We have excessive heat warnings. That's where you see that hot pink color. Where you don't see the alerts, it doesn't mean we're not going to have that high heat, because we are. In parts of the South, we're looking at temperatures near 100 degrees in many spots. 112 today in Phoenix, 99 in Dallas. It's going to feel like 100 degrees. It's going to feel like 109 in Tallahassee, and it's going to feel like 104 in Charlotte. So this is a wide swath of really warm air. You add in the humidity, and it just feels terrible. The jet stream so far to the north is allowing that heat and humidity in. It's sort of closing off any cool air from Canada. So by tomorrow, temperatures still near 100 degrees in many spots. Dallas, you're going to be at 100 degrees. Your heat index 103. So that's what it's going to feel like on your body. And look at Mobile, Alabama, the heat index of 110. The relentless heat wave, it does continue until the weekend and into next week. Nashville, 98 degrees on Monday. In Dallas, you will be at 101. It's sparking some storms this morning back to the west in parts of Michigan, Illinois. That is a cold front. We're seeing some strong storms. And in the Northeast, that's the warm front. We're seeing some strong storms, hearing lots of thunder and lots of lightning this morning, Savannah. And that cold front still needs to sweep through tomorrow in the Northeast, so we're not done with the storms yet. We'll talk more about that in the next hour.
All right, Michelle, sounds good. See you in a little bit. We're back now with the latest on the war in Ukraine. The family members of 2 American veterans fighting over there say they've gone missing. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter joins us now from central Ukraine with more on this. Hey, Molly, good to see you. So walk us through what we know about these 2 men. What were they doing in Ukraine? And how did they come to be missing? How do we find out they're missing?
Hey, Savannah, good morning. Nice to be with you. Look, the details that we have are just from those 2 families, as you mentioned. I can walk you through what we know. And of course, we are pushing for more details about what the circumstances were, where exactly they were fighting, where they might be right now. Their names, it's a 39-year-old man named Alex Druki. He was a former U.S. Army Staff Sergeant who served 2 tours in Iraq, Savannah, according to his mother. Now, she said she last heard from him on the 8th, and then on the 13th, she got a phone call from someone who claimed to be a friend of his, one of his unit members and said he had gone missing, that something had gone bad. They had gone out as a unit. There had been a Russian offensive, and he and one other man didn't come back. Now, we also know from another American family, the other man we believe is missing, 27-year-old former Marine Andy Tai Ngoc Win. And Savannah, I do just want to read, we interviewed Alex's mom overnight, and I just want to read one quick excerpt from her conversation. She talked about the last text message that they sent on the 8th. So he wrote and said, "I'll be going dark tomorrow, Mom, and possibly the next day." And I wrote back, and this is her speaking, "Stay safe and I love you." And he wrote back, "I'm sorry, I love you too." And that's the last she heard from him. So you've got two very, very worried American families right now. The Ukrainians, we are pushing for information here, but we don't know where they are right now, Savannah.
Oh, absolutely. That message just gave me chills. Just heartbreaking to hear. Now, what does the State Department have to say about all this?
That's right. So we've asked the State Department, and look, Savannah, we know that there are Americans here who have joined the Foreign Legion, who are volunteering, who are fighting alongside Ukrainian forces. So we know there are Americans in country. We've asked the State Department. They say they are aware of the unconfirmed reports of both Andy and Alex. They didn't even specifically say their names. They say they are monitoring very, very closely, of course. And they said due to privacy concerns at this point, they can't comment any further. Their blanket advice and their blanket statement kind of to Americans, though, is that it's really not safe, of course, for very obvious reasons, for Americans to come to Ukraine, and they don't condone it.
All right, Molly Hunter, thank you so much. Stay safe. Let's stay on this with Joe Cirincione. He's a distinguished fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Joe, good to see you. Always love when you join us. So let's start with these two U.S. servicemen. Now, the State Department has warned against Americans traveling there, as Molly just mentioned. But what do you make of this? I mean, do you think U.S. citizens who are watching this, who maybe are veterans, who have served, who are moved to go help Ukraine, should they be allowed to do so, or are there better ways to show support?
I think Americans who want to aid Ukraine, including by aiding them by fighting with them or helping to train them on how to use U.S. weapons, should be allowed to go. This is a war. There are going to be casualties. And in this case, the casualties are Americans taken as prisoners by the Russians. These two men were fighting up near Russian lines, up near Kyiv, a very tense period of fighting. I think they knew what they were going into. It's terrible that they've been captured. I'm afraid they're going to be used as pawns by the Russians now in their effort to try to get the U.S. and the West to back off on sanctions. Any release of these Americans will undoubtedly be conditioned to American loosening of the sanctions on Russia.
I want to switch gears here and ask you about this meeting this morning. The leaders of France, Germany, and Italy have arrived in Kyiv. The visit comes amid criticism by some in Ukraine over their response to this war. France's Macron continues to speak with President Putin, while Germany has come under fire for not sending enough weapons. What do you make of this trip? What is the goal here, and what kind of message does it send?
There are two areas of tensions between the Ukrainians and the Europeans, and one is just on the amount of aid. For example, Germany, whose chancellor is there visiting, promised aid in fiery speeches 2 months ago. None of the military aid has been delivered yet. We hope that this trip will result in announcements of some of those howitzers, tanks, and anti-artillery systems coming in. Europe in general has been a little less generous than the United States in the aid, and there are concerns that the European leaders are starting to put pressure on Ukraine to negotiate, to settle, to make territorial concessions, because the effects of this war, the inflation, the gas prices, the food crisis that it's engendered, are starting to really hit European economies. Those are the sources of tension, although the Europeans pledge their undying support and say that it will not waver.
Joe, yesterday the U.S. announced plans to send $1 billion worth of weapons to Ukraine. That's the single largest package to date. Let's hear first what Secretary Lloyd Austin said about this.
When you're in the fight, you can never get enough, and you can never get it quick enough. So, but having said all that, we're going to work hard to make sure we're doing everything humanly possible. We're going to continue to move heaven and earth to get them the capability that they need.
Now, Austin also tweeted the latest list of weapons being sent. I think we're going to be able to pull some of that up. There it is. It includes 18 howitzers, 2 Harpoon coastal defense systems. Walk us through some of this. What does this latest package tell us about the nature of the fighting going on right now? What do you and your expertise make of the weapons that are on this list? Will the Ukrainians be satisfied?
Mostly satisfied. As Austin said, they need more. Their list is about 5 times the size of what they're actually getting. But you can see this is artillery heavy. That's the kind of war we're fighting. This is a grinding artillery war. And right now, the Ukrainians are just outgunned. They need more and bigger, longer range howitzers. They're getting some of this in this package. They also need anti-ship missiles. Significantly, this is the first shipment of U.S. Harpoon missiles. This can take out some of those Russian cruisers and destroyers that are now blockading Ukraine in the Black Sea. So this will be welcome. The Ukrainians want more longer range systems. The Europeans can help supply this. America has said that we will supply this in the weeks and months ahead. The question is how fast can it get to the battlefield, where some of this equipment is already being destroyed in the war.
Joe Cirincione, thank you so much. As always, we appreciate it. And now to a major step in the fight against future pandemics. The Biden administration is preparing to introduce its proposal for a new defense strategy against future biological threats. That is according to a new report from Bloomberg. The proposal, expected to be released next month, will address confusion over the responsibility of government agencies during a pandemic, something, of course, we've seen throughout COVID. President Biden is also poised to ask for $88.2 billion in funding. And this comes just months after President Biden fought to secure $88 billion for COVID funding from Congress as part of his American Pandemic Preparedness Plan. But the Biden administration has already run into obstacles in getting the money needed to fight just COVID, causing experts to worry about the immediate future of this pandemic. Dr. Bob Lahita joins us now for more on this. He's the director of the Institute for Autoimmune and Rheumatic Diseases at St. Joseph Health, also a professor of medicine at the Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine, and most importantly, our friend here on Morning News Now. Doctor, great to have you. So according to a report from the Center for Global Development, the chance of another pandemic similar or worse than COVID in the next 25 years is 50%. I know that's not something any of us even want to remotely think about and kind of think, can't we just get through this and then this nightmare will be over? But previous reports from the World Health Organization show the global community's not prepared for another pandemic. What does the Biden administration need to do here to prepare? Is the president's plan enough to combat another virus? And what would you say to people who are even hearing this conversation right now thinking, what?
Yeah, well, Savannah, thank you. The probability of another pandemic is fairly good. And as you said, 50%, which is a very high number of organisms that are out there, mostly coronavirus, are likely in the next few years. We've seen a cycle of about every 10 years where a new COVID kind of virus, a SARS virus, has arisen. But the government, the White House plan, which is being unveiled, is really dedicated to protecting against the current pandemic by expanding testing and providing coverage. As you know, the White House has asked for, as you say, $88 billion. They also want to prepare for these new variants going forward. And that includes genomic testing, wastewater testing, and all the sorts of things that we hear about that will allow us to identify within a very short period of time new variants, which could be worse than the Omicron or worse than the variant. To prevent economic and educational shutdowns is another point. We have to keep schools open. We have to keep factories and companies open. We can't let these things shut down. And lastly, Savannah, to vaccinate the world. You know, our country has given tens of billions of doses of vaccine to underdeveloped countries, 165 billion doses to something like 88 countries in the world that have no vaccines. So this is the plan going forward. It's pretty scary when you think about it, but we want to be prepared up front and not caught as we were short back 2 years ago.
Yeah, I do want to ask you about the more immediate future before we even think about some future pandemic, because health experts are sounding the alarm right now. The White House COVID response team had this first to say about the lack of COVID funding, what we were just talking about, from Congress. Take a listen.
The resource challenge, the money challenge you've been hearing about from me, from others, is really about what's going to happen in the fall. We do not have enough resources to have enough vaccines for every American for the next generation of vaccines. So the challenges are coming up in the fall. We need the money now.
It is not inevitable that we, that we don't have funding and that we don't make these treatments and tests available. It's a choice. And my hope is that we can, and our collective hope is that we can make the choice, work together with Congress to get that funding. Because again, we are in a much better place in this pandemic than we were, but we are not done with the pandemic.
Doctor, what happens if we don't have enough vaccines come fall? Are you worried that's going to happen? And then are we in store for another surge?
Well, if there's another surge, we could have a major problem. What I am concerned about is the uninsured, the people who depend on government supplies of vaccines and testing. People who have insurance, people have Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance, they should be covered as far as their ability to obtain the vaccines, the monoclonal antibodies, and the antiviral drugs. It's those people who have no means where the government provides free testing, free vaccination, free medication if you're very ill. Those people are the ones who always, not only just with the pandemic, but with all diseases that are chronic, those are the ones in lower socioeconomic groups that suffer the most. And this is the group that we as physicians are all concerned about. We're willing to give the aid, but provider reimbursement is a problem when funds run out.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to ask you quickly before I let you go about Dr. Anthony Fauci. Of course, he's largely been the public face, or at least one of them, of the fight against COVID, and he announced he tested positive. What do we know about his diagnosis?
He is well protected, and I am sure has access to the best resources. He's a man who's 81 years of age, so he's in that vulnerable group. But, you know, Savannah, the Omicron variant, as I've said, is 8 times more infective, and just about everybody in the population is either going to be infected at some point. So I'm not surprised. He's having mild symptoms, which is the trend right now with the new Omicron variants, sort of a very bad cold. But in some people, unknown in advance, some people suffer from the Omicron and do not do very well. I am sure that Dr. Fauci has the best resources available and will do okay with this infection.
Good to hear. Dr. Bob Lahida, thank you so much. Always love when you join us. Welcome back. The Federal Reserve's interest rate hike is forcing many home buyers to make a tough decision. With soaring mortgage rates expected to go even higher, some are choosing to buy a house now for fear of paying more later. Here's NBC News business and tech correspondent Jolene Kent.
I'm so glad that we found these. Sky Callahan was in a rush. So financially, overall, it's been a little bit of a struggle. We had to either buy before the rates went up or completely wait. With a growing family, she needed a bigger house. Calculating what the New Jersey family could afford depended on interest rates, which have surged. A 30-year fixed-rate mortgage climbing from 3.3% at the start of this year to 6.22% now. Home prices have been soaring, too. Median sale prices have skyrocketed 16% in the past year. The combination can mean as much as a $1,000 increase in monthly payments for families like the Callahans, a trend pushing some to act in a hurry. When we saw that the rates were going up due to inflation, that's when we really got into gear and decided okay, we need to make a move now because it's only going to get worse. That feeling Callahan was getting is called inflationary psychology, and many Americans say they've got it too, beyond the housing market. Nearly 90% of Americans are concerned about inflation, and more than a third of shoppers said they have purchased something recently for fear that the price would continue to rise.
It's our rationale that we need to stockpile things before the price increases, which just creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. As we spend more, we feel like we have less money. We blame it on inflation when maybe it's actually our psychology. Inflationary psychology can impact the way we spend money on everything from houses to swimsuits to baby formula, triggering even more stress and anxiety. I feel pressured to buy now as opposed to waiting a few months because who knows what the prices are going to be then.
If you're going after a big ticket item that you really need, say a house,
should you be approaching this in a certain way?
Yeah, honestly, we won't see a dramatic drop in prices after inflation stabilizes. Maybe it's time to say, instead of buying this year, maybe I can rent somewhere affordable and wait till I have more savings to buy those big ticket items.
Big ticket items whose costs seem to just keep going up. Jolene Kent, NBC News.
Experts are expecting an increase in international travel this summer after the U.S. dropped its COVID testing requirement for people entering the country. NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has more on how airlines are hoping to cash in.
Already, United Airlines reports a 7% jump in searches for international travel, most for flights this summer to Europe, Mexico, and the Caribbean. With the summer travel season already taking off, the U.S. has lifted its requirement that airline passengers entering the country present a negative COVID test.
I think it's been long enough. I think we all know the risk now of traveling.
It was a huge relief to not have the stress of waiting to see whether or not I would test positive.
The rule had been in place since January of 2021. For months, the tourism industry had lobbied for the move, even as Omicron variants drove up COVID cases. The U.S. Travel Association now estimates lifting the testing rule will bring more than 5 million extra airline passengers and another $9 billion in travel spending by the end of the year. Already, United Airlines reports a 7% jump in searches for international travel, most for flights this summer to Europe, Mexico, and the Caribbean. International airfare is also rising, with round-trip tickets averaging more than $1,000, up 22% over last summer. Still, domestic airfare has dropped for the first time this year, averaging $390 round-trip.
If you want to travel internationally this summer, flexibility is key to getting a good price. If you can wait and travel in September or even October, you can save huge on international airfares.
But if you're planning an overseas vacation in July or early August and haven't booked it already, that summer getaway will cost you.
Welcome back. A documentary premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival is focusing new attention on an old love affair. In 2008, the largest known collection of queer love letters from the World War II era was discovered. Now it's led to a new short film called The Letterman. NBC News Now anchor Aaron Gilchrist spoke with the film's director about why it was so important to tell those stories.
For filmmakers, having your work featured at the Tribeca Film Festival can jumpstart your career.
This is something that, as a filmmaker, I've always dreamed of.
Andy Valentine was directing music videos just a year ago. Now, his first foray into traditional filmmaking has landed him at Tribeca.
Our love is complete and is unlike the others.
His short film, The Letterman, is based on the true story of Gilbert Bradley and Gordon Bocher, two British men who fell in love in the 1930s.
The British public learns that its government has finally adopted a measure long talked of, but long delayed: compulsory military service.
When World War II broke out and Gilbert was drafted, he and Gordon began writing each other love letters. Those letters were first discovered in 2008 when Gilbert Bradley died. Valentine flew to the UK, hunted them down, and turned them into his movie.
In a lot of ways, this was a story that wasn't supposed to be told.
Most queer people really burned their letters during that time because they were terrified of being discovered.
The film's script, which Andy wrote with his husband, is composed almost entirely of the actual words in Gilbert and Gordon's letters.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if all of our letters could be published in the future in a more enlightened time?
That to me was like, okay, you can go ahead and tell our story. You can go ahead and share our love.
He produced the film with an almost entirely LGBTQ+ cast and crew.
I think it's important that, we're able to tell our own stories.
And he's proud The Letterman shines a spotlight on the beauty of gay love.
In a lot of LGBTQ+ cinema, we tell our worst stories of some of the worst things that's happened to us over the years. And so what I loved about Letterman was that, we really just told the story about these two men in love.
Our thanks to Aaron Gilchrist for that report. And you can stream the Letterman online right now by buying a pass on the Tribeca Film Festival's website. And our own Joe Fryer, who we're missing this morning, will host a 1-hour special featuring members of the LGBTQ+ community about the threats they're encountering, the damage being done to the gains previously made, and how they're working to keep their rights from being eroded. That special, called Pride and Backlash, airs tonight. Tune in at 10:30 right here on NBC News Now. We're back with a Morning News Now exclusive. If you've seen the Netflix show Inventing Anna, you will know the story of Anna Sorkin, the woman who posed as a German heiress and was sent to prison for defrauding businesses and people out of thousands. Well, now we can bring you up to date on what Sorkin has been up to. I got a rare interview with her from inside an ICE detention facility where she currently is while she's fighting deportation for overstaying her visa. We talked about a wide range of topics, including how much remorse she feels for her crimes and her latest business venture.
Anna Sorkin, better known by her alias, Anna Delvey, captured global headlines as the fake German heiress who was accused of defrauding banks, hotels, and even friends.
This morning, the world's most infamous imposter.
Her story brought to the mainstream by the hit Netflix series Inventing Anna.
Anna Delvey is a masterpiece.
Sorkin was sentenced to 4 to 12 years in prison after she was convicted of grand larceny and theft of services charges, a ruling she's appealing.
Do you feel that you owe anyone an apology?
You mean for what? I'm not a 12-year-old kid to apologize.
With pretending that this trust fund existed and with these accountants who now know were not true, Googling how to create a fake untraceable email.
So who would I be apologizing to for that?
The banks that you tried to take the money from.
I don't think they care.
Do you think that that was wrong?
Yeah, that was definitely unethical, yes. And I would not encourage anybody else to follow my footsteps.
She has similar defiance when it comes to former friend Rachel Williams, who accused Sorkin of sticking her with a $62,000 hotel bill, a charge of larceny in the second degree that Sorkin was ultimately acquitted of.
Do you have any interest in connecting with or making up with Rachel?
No, that story is just played out, and it's just not interesting to me. Her intentions are obvious, and she's just trying to write the narrative of her being a victim.
Do you see any part of her being an actual victim with the hotel bill?
It was an unfortunate situation. I never said, I'm right, but, I was never planning to defraud her.
What do people not know about you that now you have the chance to say?
I never really had any malicious intent, and I'm not just this vicious, scamming person trying to take advantage of anybody who's just stupid enough to fall for it.
Then how do you square the lifestyle aspect of what people see as the scam? The staying at extremely nice hotels, the shopping, the high tipping.
Well, at the time, staying in a hotel made sense for me because I was traveling so much. And it was not I was not staying in the biggest penthouse. I was just staying in a regular room.
Rooms with bills amounting to tens of thousands of dollars. She was convicted of theft for never paying.
Were you constantly thinking about how you were next going to get money to pay for those things?
Well, it hardly went so far as I had to think about the next day. Definitely, yes. It was constantly a topic of concern for me.
Now, Sorkin's being held in ICE detention while she fights deportation for overstaying her visa.
Your lawyer has said that you'd rather be here in the U.S. in the facility that you're in than be a free woman back in Germany. Do you still feel that way? Is that true? And why is that?
It's just my immigration case has been dragging on for such a long time. So I would not want to just throw away all this time that I've been working towards getting it fixed and just say, oh no, I'd rather go be on my friend's boat in south of France.
Sorkin says her time in places like Rikers Island has given her an unexpected passion: politics and criminal justice reform.
It's about finding the perfect balance and solutions for these people who did make mistakes and how you reintroduce them back into the community. if the law is just too harsh, people will just stop having like respect for it.
In the meantime, she has projects she's working on, recently participating in an art show and unveiling a new venture just this week.
And we are creating a Reinventing Anna NFT project.
It's called the Anna Access Card and can be purchased with cryptocurrency. The NFT will unlock things like exclusive live streams or a one-on-one phone call with Sorkin.
I just received so much support, like people like really going great lengths to like get in touch with me. But when people like write you a letter when you're in jail, it takes like a lot of time out of your day. Just staying connected with people who feel inspired by my story.
What do you think people are inspired by?
There's always a way to turn something bad into something good. And I guess I never gave up, and like just trying to think your way out of your problems. And there's a line which should be drawn to like to which methods you should resort while trying to achieve what you want.
Do you think you crossed that line?
Well, the government definitely thinks that way, so.
And what do you think? What does Anna Delvey think?
Well, my case is still in direct appeal, so I guess I'll take that up in court.
Since you were convicted of this fraud, why would someone believe what you say? Why should someone buy something that you're selling?
I don't even know. That's a good question, but I don't know, because I guess I changed so much in a way too. And I was like 23, 24, 25, and people should just need to think on themselves back when they were in their mid-20s.
What does the reinvented Anna look like?
Hopefully I'll be given a chance to like focus all my energy into something legal. I'd love to be given an opportunity to for people not to just dismiss me as like a quote-unquote scammer, and just see what I'm going to do next.
It was a surreal conversation, and you may have noticed that background around Anna being blurred. That's because she spoke to us from the common room of that ICE detention facility she's currently being held in upstate New York. Anna says she's received hundreds of handwritten letters in jail, including several marriage proposals. It's clear the Netflix series has given her a fan base. And about that show, Anna told me she tried not to take it too personally, but that she thought Julia Garner, the actress who played her, did a great job. And she says her friends say that she nailed her in her portrayal. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now, but the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.